Welcome to the pandemic-friendly Cloud City Meetup. I'm Chris Kelly, along with our co-host Charles Fitzgerald, who is at the Zoom controls. We are the organizers. We are technology enthusiasts and somewhat irreverent angel investors here in Seattle. We're coming to you live and direct from Cloud City. It used to mean just Seattle, but in these extraordinary and unprecedented times, as Charles would say, we have decoupled from geography. Our mission is to talk to today's leaders and tomorrow's pioneers pushing the technology frontier. Our guest today is Joe Lonsdale. Joe is the general partner of 8VC, a multi-stage venture capital firm and incubator, and founder of the Cicero Institute think tank. In 2016 and 2017, he was the youngest member on Forbes Midas List of the top 100 venture capitalists. Prior to 8VC, Joe founded Formation 8, a top-performing venture capital fund, as well as Palantir, a multi-billion-dollar global software company best known for its work in defense and finance. He is also a founder of many other companies and was an early executive at Peter Thiel's Clarion Capital, which he helped grow into a large global macro hedge fund. He also worked with PayPal while he was at Stanford in undergrad. I have a few questions and conversation for Joe, and then we'll throw it open as we go along. Please do submit questions via the Zoom Q&A button, and definitely at the end, fill out our feedback survey at feedback.cloudcitymeetup.com. So Joe, just to kick us off, I'd love to talk about leaving the Bay Area. Your parents moved to the Bay Area because it was, in your words, quote, where you could accomplish anything, unquote. But now you are one of the Bay Area's highest profile departures. What has changed in the last 40 years in Silicon Valley? And honestly, is Seattle any different?
Hey, Chris, thanks for having me on. It's good to see you. You know, my dad actually moved there for a few different reasons. I think one of them was the weather, to be honest. He came from outside of Boston, Massachusetts, and got tired of the winters in New England. But it was obviously a great place for opportunity. It was affordable. It was a great place to build businesses, as we've seen in the last 40 years, right? There's a lot of things that Silicon Valley had going for it. I wrote obviously a long, obnoxious article in the Wall Street Journal. If people want to see the editorial on why I left, I won't force you to hear every detail again here. But you know, I think the thing that stands out to me the most is the quality of life of people close to me who haven't been as economically successful. We have a lot of staff, we have a lot of family, you know, and we have people we're building companies with. I'm constantly trying to convince people to come build a company with me. And, you know, we launched 7 things last year, and I have 45 people in my firm, and we build a lot these days. And when I'm trying to convince someone to come in, and if they're coming and they're going to be a senior executive, they're going to be paid as a startup, maybe $220,000. And if their spouse is not working, that's not even middle class in the Bay Area, which is crazy. So, yeah. So I think cost of living is a really, really big problem. And then I guess the other thing is just the fact that, you know, there's just such a bad government, such a demonization of people who make money and who succeed in that area, that it just didn't feel like the right place to be part of a community and to raise my kids.
Got it. I understand that. You know, somewhat tongue in cheek, I got to ask, why not Miami? Seems to be a lot of other famous venture capitalists moving there as well.
I think Miami is really cool. I think if I was single or had alternative lifestyle, I'd enjoy it even more than I would as a place to raise young daughters, but it's definitely a fun city.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So you know, as part of your move, but also just generally knowing you for a while, you promote a lot of entrepreneurial solutions to public problems.
Yes.
You know, you gotta start with what's been in the news recently: power grids and other infrastructure, not just in Texas, but you know, honestly, having lived in Silicon Valley for 10 years, it can be pretty bad in California and everywhere in between on the political spectrum. How can our infrastructure be fixed?
Well, the power thing in California is especially a mess. It's really ironic to me seeing Texas mocked for its 1 week of ice and the problems there. You know, California. It's actually interesting. Palantir has a big contract. I don't know if you saw in the last few months with PG&E now to try to help it manage its infrastructure better using data and whatnot. You know, it's a tough problem. Things that are functional in our society are when you have a competition of ideas. And so there's lots of ways you can make any kind of sector functional. When you have multiple businesses, you could try different things and things outcompete others, and then people copy those best practices or else they go away. Power is tough because it's kind of a natural monopoly. So for natural monopolies, like you do want to use markets where you can, but you also have to have just certain rules and certain confidence. I would probably find ways of breaking it up and making it compete. That would be my bias. I'd find ways of allowing in different competition where they're allowed to use the grid in different ways. but it's there's a lot of good ideas in the policy world coming out on these things. But I think that's what you really got to push for, is how do you allow competition of ideas, and that is harder to do in power than lots of other broken areas. It's a lot easier to do that in education or healthcare or criminal justice, but power is a messy one.
Yeah, I can hear that. Are there other infrastructure targets beyond the ones that you just mentioned? I know education and criminal justice are two big areas.
Those are great policy targets. I mean, the other infrastructure thing I guess I have to mention, if we're going to talk about infrastructure, is I'm pretty obsessed with tunneling. I'm an investor in Elon Musk's boring company. And I think people just vastly underestimate this, especially because there's pictures of him like riding Dogecoin dogs online and stuff. They probably think he's just screwing around, which I'm sure he is with part of his time. But he's also not joking at all about the tunnels thing. I think that if you care at all about economic opportunity for the least well off, or for people to be able to live middle class lives while not having to commute very much at all and still have access to the jobs in all of our high growth areas, tunnels are awesome. You basically can live really far away from a city, and you can commute very, very quickly, and kind of everyone wins. And so I'm really hoping we build tens of billions of dollars of tunnels around all of our major cities. I know Seattle has a few they started on that were very big and very slow, but if we can do these as quickly as a boring company claims they can now, I think it's going to be very exciting. I think it's the best infrastructure we should be working on.
I understand that. It's interesting. If you look at land use in Seattle, about 80% of Seattle is single family home density. So it's going to be pretty expensive when you have relatively low density. Would you offer any solutions to encouraging people to live in a higher density kind of city, more like European, or would you encourage it to spread out more?
This is one of those things where like the conventional wisdom is that everyone needs to live in super high density in order for people to be happy and in order for the environment to work. And that's one of the great things about things like tunneling, is you actually can all live in single family houses. Like, people prefer to live in single family houses. I don't know which one you're living in right now, but that is what people prefer on average. And I think it's awesome to get people in apartments and get people in high density situations. But if we can get people in outlying areas and single family houses, we can get them in quickly and affordably with electric cars and tunnels. I'm obviously an early investor in Joby Aviation, which you saw Reid Hoffman's backing with $1 billion right now. Joby Aviation's a electric vertical takeoff and landing company. It's a new class. Basically, it's 3 dimensions, right? You're either going to go above or below, and both of these are going to be cheaper and easier the next few years. And so I think that allows people to keep the single family home lifestyle that most of them want while still making it all work. I think that's like the high level thing that makes sense.
Got it. And in Texas is also known for having a high degree of single family housing. Is there anything else appealing about Austin specifically, or any good stories?
Austin has a lot of the best, has the best music scene. It has really good barbecue. And people are very kind here. I think the culture is awesome. I think I took a bunch of my friends sniper rifle shooting last week on a ranch where we hit small middle targets at 500 yards. I got very consistent to that. 700 yards is harder with the wind. It starts to mess you up. But 500 yards, I was 5 for 5 at the end. No, but it's Elon Musk moved here. Hayes Barnard is taking company public for $20 billion here. Drew Houston of Dropbox, JD Ross, who we worked with at Addepar. I started Open Door. There's just this. I have like 20 friends who moved here who are entrepreneurs, so it's fun. We're hanging out, we're building stuff.
That's fantastic. Talking about building, or pivot to those waves, those tech waves that I was talking about at the start. You're one of the very few people out there who has had large successes over multiple technology waves. Web 1.0 PayPal, you went to Enterprise 2.0 with Palantir, and now, the smart enterprise and biotech with 8VC. How have you gotten inspiration for moving on or to create the next wave ahead of everybody?
Mostly I just follow what my smartest friends are doing, and I take credit for their work. I found that works extremely well.
Got it. It's one of the magics of being an investor is you end up in the press a lot. And there's a lot of entrepreneurs out there building really hard. Do you think we're at the beginning of a new cycle for tech and the economy, or is this just kind of like a intermezzo?
Well, I mean, honestly, it feels like everyone just really appreciated a lot of things we've been doing the last 10 years. All of a sudden, they appreciate them a lot more, partially because tech was the only thing that was growing and working. Tech was kind of the hero of 2020, right? So tech allowed all these workflows to move to the cloud. It allowed us to get all of our deliveries. It allowed us to do all of our meetings and whatnot. Like, even this would probably be like an abnormal thing. Maybe 2 years ago, I probably should have come and flown to Seattle and sat down and met people, which has its advantages. It would have been nice to see you in person, but it's also a lot more efficient that I could, do an all-day retreat here for a new startup I'm building, and then do a Zoom with, various mentors of mine and you without having to get on an airplane. So I mean, tech's such a hero, and people are realizing that. It's impossible not to. The markets realize that. The question is, like, what are the new tech waves going on? Well, these things are very autocorrelated. Once more stuff goes to the cloud, once there's more of the digital record of what's going on that exists in the cloud, you can now build on that as well in ways you couldn't before, because there's a lot more data, right? You can now suddenly do a lot of healthcare risk-based workflows to do competition and save money in health, because you have all the data you didn't before to be able to know how to price risk better, right? Or you can suddenly do all these things where, because the whole mortgage transaction is now in the cloud with Blend and all the data is there, you can now really quickly and easily like figure out when they're starting it, how to direct them to a broker better, and how to work with the title insurance company better. And there's just all sorts of these workflows that because they've gone digital, then there's more value we can create digitally. And so it's just like kind of acceleration effect where you're seeing just a ton of really great companies being built now that maybe couldn't have been built 10 years ago.
Yeah, no, I understand that. It's something Charles and I were joking about before the start was sometimes you have to decide whether you want to build a product company or an outsourced IT department. I know that was long one of the criticisms about Palantir, which has obviously gone on to be wildly successful. Maybe share a war story from Palantir. What led to the starting of this company? What was the core insight that kind of started it off, and how did you build it up into the company that it is today?
Yeah, there's always a disagreement about exactly the core insight there. I'll give you a couple frameworks about it. I think one framework was taking the very, very best technology cultures in our culture that had gotten way ahead of the big institutions and way ahead of how government was doing things, unfortunately, around DC, and applying those technology cultures to those problems. I think that's one very high level of something that was very valuable to do. Another part of it, that the way I tend to see it, like my favorite view of it, was taking things that used to be IT services and showing that they actually could be done 80, 90, 95, 98% through products instead. So Palantir took a lot of things that used to have to be like data integration work, or like just building out ways of doing search and discovery, building out rules for collaboration with all the kind of nitpick rules about who could see what between intelligence agencies, how you store it, how you share it. There's so many different things like that you'd have someone like IBM or Accenture in the past would have like 2,000 people working for 2 years on a contract, and wouldn't get down and go over budget, and it'd be 3 years, and IBM would secretly be happy because they get paid even more now that it's going over budget because they're getting paid cost plus, right? There's the whole system which is like corrupt and broken services. And if you can go in and say, actually, this product does all this stuff out of the box, like literally Unisys got paid $3 billion to do this for DHS, Department of Homeland Security, to put their data together, and Palantir literally out of the box was able to do the same thing and better in less than a month than what they took $3 billion in 3 years. And so obviously it wasn't 100% productized, but it's not because we're just like 36 times faster with the 20th of people. It's because we actually did productize a lot of that work and made it possible to create leverage. So that's so I think that was a key insight, is things that used to be services can be mostly product with new and better technology if you think about it right ahead of time.
No, I think that makes a ton of sense. Speaking of the government, a lot of government funding during the Cold War helped create some of the new markets for tech. Should that cycle repeat? Should the government start to get involved?
I'm so skeptical of this. I just got this email today where these bipartisan people are really excited about spending hundreds of billions of dollars on new tech all around. They're going to create 12 new Silicon Valleys all around the nation, and they're going to spend all this money on them. And it's just, there's a cultural difference now between now and 70 years ago. There's a few things that we have to admit are very different. So number one, innovation was much more expensive back then. You really didn't have lots of just people who could just like go and innovate themselves and figure things out. You had to have a big institution doing it. So you had a lot more competence in big institutions because they were the only option. Number two, World War II was a sort of total war culturally, where a lot of the very best people got involved and had to get involved. And it was like your duty to get involved. Like if you had anything like that again, you'd have a lot of my peers who are the top builders all involved in the government. If you have all these like top talent involved in the government, it's a lot easier to get these things to work. And so I'm a lot, and then finally like there's so much going on where you can make a lot more money as a competent person these days. It used to be if you were a super competent person versus being a professor, you're a super competent business builder versus professor, there might only be like a 2 or 3x salary difference. Now there's like 100x or 1,000x salary difference. And so the smartest people are no longer PhD professors. They're just not the smartest people. There's just incentive is so strong to go make 100 times the money by just being like a baller and crushing it and creating things. And so you don't have the smartest in society anymore directing things like the National Science Foundation. They're kind of 2 or 3 steps down from my friends who are the better engineers and scientists in many cases. And so that's just that's like a fact. People are very uncomfortable with it happens to be true. So if you give these people just infinite resources, it's going to go to stupid places relative to where the market and the people building the best companies are going to put it. So like, is it better than just like spending money on like random special interest subsidies? Probably. I'll probably go to at least some things that are decent, but it's going to be a lot of cronyism. It's going to be a lot of mess. I'm very skeptical of industrial capitalism. And I'm frustrated because people like me now have to go spend time convincing these people to give me money, which is stupid. Like I'd much rather convince the smarter people to give me money who are running the big businesses and having to go to government and spend all my time networking there. It's not what I like to do. It's crony. It's nasty. There's people who are better at it than I am, who are willing to spend all their time. And I'm not willing to spend all my time doing that, but I have to hire people to help with it if they do this. So anyway, I think it's like a messy thing they're doing. It's kind of unfortunate.
Should we work to be flipping that incentive system to get more smart people into government, or should we just embrace the way the world is today and look to build on top of that?
I mean, obviously it'd be better to government to be more competent. You can't just all of a sudden pay more. That itself is not going to work. You need systems of accountability and transparency and competition to be censors for broken things. If you can start doing civil service reform where you can fire things, if you start putting in censors where you can make sure there's some kind of sense of who's better, make the rewards reward people as well for paying more. But actually fixing that requires really strong leadership. I'm very skeptical we're likely to do that in the next 20 or 30 years. So I'd be very skeptical giving them too much power.
Yeah, no, I understand that. Do you have any thoughts on the government as a customer or a BD partner?
Listen, there obviously are exceptions, especially like special forces groups and the DoD. Just there are places where you do have confident government people in government, or the other way I'd put it, government's very risk averse. But if you see something they're doing as a process where they're already spending money, and it's so incredibly stupid that you have something that's like 10 times better, and it's just like obvious even to people who maybe naturally would be your ally that your way of doing it's just so much better, and you can prove it out a couple times. Like that's how you start a GovTech company. You can't just do something like slightly better because it's impossible to break into these things. But the things have like decayed and rotted to the point where the way they're doing it's like with a fax machine and like an army of people. And even then, by the way, you don't always win because the army of people who are doing this stupid thing, they're a special interest group and they don't want to be replaced. And so sometimes, but over time, usually you especially with there's budget pressures, et cetera, you can kind of get the better ways to win. So government, I built a few GovTech businesses. It's hard. I built a lot more other businesses I made a lot more money on. It's very hard to build GovTech businesses. But if you're passionate about something government's doing that's wrong and you want to fix it, I think it's a noble thing to do.
Do you have any good stories from your portfolio companies, either that you founded like OpenGov or other ones like Promise on great company or government partnerships?
Oh yeah, I mean, I think some of the very best stories were always like working with SOCOM, working with the special interests. Working with the special forces groups. Special interests. The special forces groups tend to be really competent, and they have people whose lives are on the line, so they need the best solutions. And so, like early on with Palantir, with these guys, like they were dying to IED deaths. They needed to track it all much better, and the system they were given by the Army just wasn't working at all. So we let them just use our system for very cheap. And they basically started mapping it all out, and IED just went way down. And then all these Army groups that were stationed in Iraq said, "Wow, can we use this too?" Because they found out. And so we said, "Sure." They couldn't contract it because the Army was really difficult, so we just gave it to them for free for a while. And then the general in the Army, who had spent like billions of dollars on the competing system, found out, shut it down right away, ordered them to destroy all the records that showed all the lives we were saving. And then when there was a bid that went up, he just gave right away $6 billion to like his friend's thing instead of ours. And so we actually sued him, and we won the lawsuit. We showed he destroyed the records. We showed he was wrong. We showed he didn't consider the outside solution. So I guess it was positive solution with special forces guys and with the common people in the Army. Negative thing where we actually had to sue the asshole running the Army though. So it is what it is.
Yeah, it's tough when you have to sue it, but if you were clearly right in that scenario, it sounds like
it's one of those things where it's just and that's what you got to do with government. It's like you have to do that. Like I'm not someone who ever sues anyone. I wasn't running Palantir at this time. I'd already kind of started transition out, but it was the right thing to do. Where they fight, like where they're corrupt and they had to be told what to do.
Let's pause for a minute and talk. You mentioned something earlier about the Cold War. It was a total cultural war between the U.S. and USSR, and two very different philosophies. Do you have any comments on China and sort of decoupling? Is it a new Cold War?
I hope it's not a permanent new Cold War. I think first of all, China is extraordinary what they've accomplished the last 20, 30 years. I think Deng Xiaoping was mentored by Lee Kuan Yew, who's someone I really admire, who built up Singapore. Then he convinced Deng Xiaoping to tell people it's glorious to be rich, it's glorious to work hard and create. And I think they created a really positive culture in that sense. There's a lot of negative things left over from the Cultural Revolution, where there's a lot of low trust, a lot of people screwing each other over. but it was a very positive sense of like hard work and advancement and a very kind of very realist place. And so there's like lots of positive things. There's lots of real innovation. Of course, they copied everything at first, but there's lots of areas where they're really innovating now. All of that said, it's very scary to have a society that's not based on the philosophy that, of freedom that ours is based on. And some people disagree that these philosophies matter. Some people would criticize America for things it's done. And obviously America is not perfect, but I think having a court system that's independent and is functional, which we do have, and which protects our basic rights, to me, that's extremely important. And it's obviously, and when you don't have that, you get people violating rights. I think what comes out historically 50 years from now is there's probably just a lot more extreme corruption, extreme nasty things, even than we're hearing kind of leaking out. Like if a powerful guy in China thinks your wife is hot, you may find yourself like charged with something, and you have no ability to stop it if he calls the right person, and he takes your wife as a mistress. And that sounds horrible. I mean, 100% that happens thousands of times in China because it's what happens with systems when there's not transparency and there's not checks on power. That's human nature. So there's really positive things about China. There's absolutely terrifying things about China. I tend to empathize that we probably enable them a little bit too much, assuming it would make them better. There's probably ways in which we should work with a lot of people to force them to behave better, and work with a lot of partners like Japan and India and UK and Germany to force China to behave better. But that would require real strong leadership and coordination. And I think Biden lacks that. He's kind of too easy on China, and Trump lacked the ability to coordinate with our allies properly for pushing back. So I think we haven't had the right response, is my view.
Got it. I understand that. Well, maybe looking towards some successful government examples, is there anything common amongst these successful government policies? You mentioned Lee Kuan Yew. Do you have any other?
Well, I think when you come back, if you want to come back to policy, it's a fun area. I'd say transparency and accountability are what you have in common with these successful government policies that are inspiring and that are going to build a better future for us all. So if you want to say like, what are the areas that are challenging us in the US right now? There's things like education and things like healthcare, things like housing prices, things like criminal justice. All of these areas, if you set it up properly with the right accountability incentives, there's really good solutions that we know work. And the problem is special interests don't like this, because in every one of these areas, whenever you set up the incentives and accountability correctly, whoever's benefiting from the current lack of transparency and lack of incentives is not going to like that, because they're going to get hit. But overall, there's lots of positive things. I'll give you one example. In Texas, they set the technical schools here to have performance-based funding, where part of the funding for the technical schools is the salary of the salary of the young adults who come out of these schools for the first 3 years and how they do. So what happened is, this is 7 years ago, all the schools said, wow, we want to get more funding. We should figure out what skills we're teaching and figure out how to teach skills to get people good jobs. And, 7 years later, salaries have gone up 61% in 7 years, because like all of a sudden the schools for the first time actually had to care for their own living about this. It's just amazing. When you give someone an incentive, it works, And in criminal justice, the same thing. You give the probation officers in Montana and California. They had this great bipartisan law passed 12 years ago in California. I don't usually like California policy, but this was one of the best ones. I think it was SB 678, I remember. And this is some policy nerdy stuff for you if you want to check it out. And it's basically, they said the county probation offices, if they can return less people to state prisons than there had been before without crime rate going up, then they get to keep some of the savings. And so these places all started studying rehabilitation techniques, because this was their incentive, this was their job. And they started sharing best practices. They started trying different things each locally, depending on what worked wherever they were. And the state $1 billion over the next 12 years based on this policy. And they helped all these communities by not sending people back for bad reasons and by helping people rehabilitate. And so it's just amazing what transparency metrics and incentives does. So I'm all about that. There's lots of examples of this in every area. So we're working in about 8 states now with a Cicero Action, my lobbying group, and Cicero Institute's the 501c3, and we're getting a bunch of good laws passed along these lines. So that's my hobby.
That's fantastic. Well, I'll take a pause and give you a chance to plug the Cicero Institute. What is it, and how do you like to be engaged? And how can you learn more about it if you'd like to?
Yeah, sure. Cicero Institute. It's a group that tries to understand how the functional parts of our free society work, and tries to understand, what's working, what's not working, and goes and studies the areas that aren't working, and says, how do we create opportunity for the working and middle class and make society work better by using some of these laws and frameworks, where we actually find ways of creating accountability incentives to fix the things that are broken. And so it's a lot of stuff in criminal justice. It's a lot of stuff and there's a lot of stuff in healthcare where there's just very often we're encountering special interests that we try to call out and say, okay, this will be working better for everyone, but these interests have pushed these bad laws, and we're gonna fix this. And so it's 20 really bright people. I'm probably not giving it a great pitch, but it's 20 really bright people, and we're passing a lot of good laws and just trying to do our best. We try to be really nonpartisan, and we tend to have the far left not like us, but the moderate left does. So the right's a little easier for us. But we're actually opening up in some moderate left states now too, and trying to get good things done for both sides.
That's fantastic. Well, let's compare a bunch of different states and cities with wildly different political spectrums. Maybe compare Seattle, Austin, Miami, Denver, some of these other newer places. What's your take on the different tech ecosystems out there that are outside of Silicon Valley?
I mean, Seattle is obviously really strong, as I'd love to do more there. We have a handful of great investments there. One of my favorite things we're doing in Seattle was one of my favorite things we're doing in Seattle was
biotech investment up here recently, didn't you?
Oh yeah, there's a few of those. There's this company Deliver, which the guy who built Amazon's infrastructure is really strong. Mm-hmm. We found that because we were trying to build what's the right solution for merchants who want to have a warehouse and carrier infrastructure, and talk to everyone smart in the space. Of course, we ended up talking to Amazon people. Then we found this guy was leaving to build something similar. So we led his first round. He's led 4 big up rounds now, building a giant company. But no, there's bio stuff there. There's people out of Amazon and Microsoft. There's all sorts of great startups, of course. So I'm very bullish on Seattle. It's kind of one of the 5 or 6 places. I probably should spend even more time there. Obviously, Austin has a lot going on. Austin probably is not as strong deep tech as Seattle yet, just because there's not as much deep tech here. Although they're starting to see more engineers move here. It's a really good place to build sales offices, customer support offices, and bring engineers as well. Denver, of course, Palantir is moving there. There's a lot going on there. Boston and New York are both really strong places. I hope New York gets its act together. It's a whole separate issue, but in general, we love building there. Miami, we'll see. A lot of my friends are telling me Miami's going to be a strong center. Miami's even less engineers than Austin, so I'm a little more skeptical. But there's a lot of capital moving there, a lot of good people. So we'll see how that evolves. But we frankly, Chris, we're doing things all over the country. We're doing things in Tennessee and Iowa and Chicago and Oklahoma even. So I think good tech talent is now everywhere relative to 10 years ago.
Gotcha. If you turn to investing now, beyond just kind of the build, what categories are you watching or more excited about? You mentioned logistics, but what else out there that you're really excited about?
Well, the renaissance in biology is probably the most important thing. If you look back in 100 years about what's going on in the next 10 years, or look back in 50 years, even, it's going to be pretty obvious that this renaissance in biology was I think the biggest thing happening. And what happened is, in 2012 with the creation of CRISPR and gene editing, and with some of the breakthroughs in cell therapy, with some of the breakthroughs in synthetic biology, and just all these other tools being created, the pace at which we're learning about how cells work, about how life works, is just accelerated massively. And so every month now, with all these new tools and discoveries, we're learning more than we were every couple of years, even a decade ago. And so what that means is there's just all sorts of new ways you could do things. I think the key thing on cell therapy to understand is kind of like chemists used to run pharma by making molecules as drugs in the mid 20th century. And then you had with Genentech and these other things, biologics, which is little tiny things like peptides and antibodies that could be drugs as well in the 1980s. And then the 2010s, you basically had cells, which are, hundreds of thousands of times bigger than these peptides and antibodies, probably more than that. And so they're much more complicated machines, and we're learning how to program them and use them. We've already saved tens of thousands of lives with late stage cancers, with blood cancer that we program cells to go hunt. You take your white blood cells, put them back in, program it. And there's tons of these cell therapies people are working on, and there's tons of infrastructure people are building to enable people to work on these things. And so it's just such an exciting area right now that we're doing a lot in these areas.
Got it. Is there any particular sector that you think is just too early?
I think quantum is really early to be investable. I think it's really good. People are working on it. I'm really happy that our big tech companies are working on it and the government's working on it. It's felt too early for a while. I think maybe that's going to change in the next 5 years. But people are pushing on that so hard for a while, and we'll see. I think nuclear fusion is really exciting, and the burst fusion stuff potentially could start working in 5 or 10 years. But I think I've always kind of held off on quantum nuclear fusion and kind of said, what? If I get to the point where I have tens of billions of dollars personally, I'm happy to fund them as something good for the future, but it's probably not what my fund should be doing. So I think those are probably still, I'd put them in too early. Although, I don't know if you remember this, Oklo company that does like mini nuclear fission reactors. It actually has offers for several hundred millions of dollars it's going to raise, which is pretty cool. So they got the first approval for a new nuclear reactor in like 20 years. And this thing's much harder to get to melt down or cause any problems, and it's the size of a shipping container, and it's, perfectly clean power. So I think there is some good stuff coming, even in nuclear. The fusion thing, obviously, and hopefully in 20 years is what we're doing, but it still seems a little hard to invest in.
Well, as we look at the next, 20 years, and if you look at Austin, I'm sure there's a lot of college students and young entrepreneurs who could learn a lot from your particular style of entrepreneurship. I know I certainly learned a lot when we worked together. How are you approaching that kind of human capital development, mentoring, bringing up the next generation? Is there anything that we can learn here and do in Seattle?
Yeah, sure. Well, there's two parts to entrepreneurship. One is what's possible now that wasn't possible 5 years ago, which is what we were talking about a second ago. And two is the talents. And a lot of our best success for me is joking about like taking credit for my smart friends' work, but it really is about finding the brightest, hardest working people, and then mentoring them, involving them in earlier wins. And when you have win together, they learn how to do it themselves. They have their own ideas, exposing them to the ideas about new things that are possible, have them study them, and after they've learned how to build things with you, you back them and you help them get going, and then they're off. And I think I've had 4 chiefs of staff who are now successful CEOs of companies, which is pretty awesome. And that's the, if you look as investors, you guys do this as well, of course, like a lot of our best investments come from people who came out of previous companies. And so you have PayPal, and you have all these companies come out of PayPal, and I hire people there from even some of those, build Palantir and whatnot. And you hire people out of Palantir will build Related IQ and other companies, and then you work with them to build the next company and the next company. And every single time you build a company, you meet lots of new great people, and the ones who are the most talented, you work with them for the next one. So I think that's why you get these kind of network effects, and you get these kind of snowballs where you should get, right now, because we're lucky to have 40 or 50 very successful companies we've invested in our network. We now have hundreds of people we've worked with who we're talking to and trying to partner with. And it gets to a point where it's almost overwhelming. It's so big, we can't do all of it, but we can get to do a lot of it, which is a lot of fun.
That's fantastic. Well, we certainly appreciate you joining us here. We've got some Q&A that
let's do it.
We've received. I can go through it. I'll kind of group them into policy and
ask me the rude questions first. Is there any of those?
Excellent. I got one here saying, somebody says, I've scanned your Twitter feed. Clearly a fan of free markets and limited government. Have you gotten much pushback from that viewpoint in your startup investing efforts?
Not too much, to be honest. I'm sure there's like some percentage of people who maybe didn't want to work with me, and I didn't know why. That's very possible that could have happened. But like, surprisingly, no one's even, other than like angry people on Twitter, no one's actually in real life use that as like a big problem at all. And like, there've been a couple of people who wanted to chat about different things, and then we chatted and I ended up working with them. So no, I guess very little pushback. I think Twitter is kind of a little bit of a fake world. Obviously, even though I'm a fan of free markets, I'm not an extremist. And I deeply respect a lot of people who disagree with me, especially there's a lot of people who are moderate Democrats who I sponsor and work with. So hopefully we can work with both sides. And I think I have investors who are Soros, which you guys probably know is very left. I have investors who are like the Koch family, who's very right. So I think it's a pluralistic society, and I think it's great to be able to work with people you disagree with and find things you agree on to do together.
Do you have any concerns about people from California moving to Austin or some of these other places and voting in the same policies that they escaped from?
Yeah, it's generally really flabbergasting to me that people in San Francisco in general are voting for like the DA that we have, and there's literally like they legalize like theft. So there's like all the Walgreens are broken into and stolen from constantly. And then the Walgreens withdrew from the city because you can't really run a Walgreens in a place where people could just steal stuff in bags and no one gets arrested. And, it's much worse. I won't go into all the details. Sorry. But it's like, yeah, it is flabbergasting to me that people keep voting for these things, and that when they move, they still don't like change their politics. I think politics is very funny. People are not very thoughtful about these things. It's just more like an instinct, and that sounds good, it's nice. And so yeah, no, it does bother me and scare me a little bit if they do that. That said, the statistics of the people who choose to move to Texas from California overall are actually more along the lines of what I think, and less along the lines of people who'd vote for the people running San Francisco. So statistically has not been a problem as much as people think it might be.
Got it. Extending that in 10 or 20 years, do you think the overall zeitgeist in the US will have moved towards socialism, Medicare for all, universal basic income, wealth tax, or more towards entrepreneurship and capitalism?
I mean, it's very volatile right now, so I think it's going to go bounce back and forth, unfortunately, and there could be times when it gets crazier. I think over time, people understand what works, and people are not stupid. So I'm optimistic in our country that we will understand. I think there's basically like a lot of progressive values that are very positive. You wanna lift up the least well off. You want to push back on any forms of racism, any forms of kind of like discriminatory or exclusion or old boys clubs. I think there's positive things in the traditional values where you want to, there's certain things to respect about families, respect about patriotism, respect about pride in country, and respect to, there's like wisdom and traditional values. I think there's like the other side of things is the modernists and the rationalists and understanding markets and how they are good. So there's like positive things from progressives and from the modernists and from the traditional people. And what I really hope is our society could like take the best of these. And in 20 years, we're a lot more tolerant, but we're also a lot more understanding. You don't want to break market mechanisms, and you don't want to break the allocation of capital, and you don't want to break innovation incentives. And so hopefully in the future, we kind of like get through this period and we're in like a lot more sane place. And like, the whole healthcare thing, the real argument should be about how to make it affordable for everyone, right? It's not who pays for it. That's a stupid question. If like it's going to keep going up 6, 7, 8% in cost a year, no one's going to be able to pay for it all. So it's like a very naive thing. Oh, let's pay for it. No, it's not about paying for everyone. It's about how do we actually make it efficient so that instead of being 20% of our GDP, it's like 10 or 11% of our GDP, and it's affordable. And there's lots of ways of doing that without making it statist. And so hopefully there's a compromise there where we make it affordable for everyone and have opportunity for everyone, but don't embrace this, this crazy ideology.
Rude and direct question. This one for me, I'll fully own it. Yep. Is, do you think the governments, especially on the coasts, are so broken that they can't fix it? Or do you think that they actually can fix it? And if so, how?
Well, I'm a little bit frustrated with this bailout when the Republicans lost the Georgia Senate, because they're just sending in lots of money to keep doing irresponsible things. And so I think the way you fix things is you kind of hit rock bottom, and then you're forced to confront special interests. And so a lot of these states right now are run by special interests, are run by like the best paid prison guards in the world, have a very powerful union, and then you have this crazy teachers union. You have all sorts of other, like, I think if you drive like a trolley car in San Francisco, you retire after 20 years at age 41 and be paid 80% of your last year's salaries plus health benefits, which is like equivalent of like $200K a year for the rest of your life as a 41-year-old who used to drive a trolley car. I mean, at some point, this thing just gets to be too egregious, and it's not how you can afford to run a state. And so you need it to like go bankrupt, and then you bail out people and give them a reasonable pension. And you going forward, you kind of break some of the power of these special interests, and now they can no longer force people to vote for stupid things. I mean, there's a whole wealth tax being proposed again this week in California, but it's being proposed because the unions are making their people they control propose it. And so it's like these things only get fixed after they kind of get broken, and then they can overcome these things and get better. And so I'm hoping we get there. It's not going to happen during an administration like this. It's like sending them tons of free money. So we're probably not going to get there for a while.
Well, let's focus on that building. It's one question here is the American Rescue Plan is pouring so much money into state and local governments, they don't even know what to do with it. Is there an opportunity now to build a GovTech company focused below the federal government level?
It's very hard to very quickly build a GovTech company. So I started OpenGov about a decade ago. We're in about 3,000 municipalities, competing against some very big and broken older companies. We started because we were so just horrified by kind of the black and white and black and green screens people use to conduct their processes. It takes years of persistence to build these things. They're very hard. The government's very tough. It's you have to sell lots at once. They don't like to buy from lots of little vendors. And so we now have 29 products we offer at OpenGov, and we sell them in packages, and people like to buy them together and work together. And we are kind of like the leading solution now in a lot of areas. OpenGov is going to do it probably a lot better this year than normal, is my guess. Like, I don't know if I should be saying this in public, but as obviously it should, just because if people can afford to buy more and update more to the cloud and solve more of their problems. And so, yes, this is good for GovTech. No, I don't think you can just like really quickly build a GovTech company right now in the face of this.
Yeah, I understand that. If here's focused on, again, the building, you can have successes like it sounds like you're having with OpenGov. What have been some of your biggest failures? What was your distinct and special contribution?
Yeah, sure. Just to be clear, OpenGov like probably would have been considered a failure 5 years ago. These things take a long time to get to work. If it wasn't like me building it, if I didn't have Mark Andreessen on the board, John Chambers on the board from Cisco, there were multiple points at which it would have probably sold and given up like 4, 5, 6 years ago. It now is successful and working very well. But like, it's like a lot of times something's a failure, and so you're just persistent enough that it's not a failure anymore. And that's like what people don't realize, right? These things are like Palantir was like limping along in years like 3 and 4, and just, I mean, sure, we were hiring the very best people and it was very exciting, but the business was not working yet. These things are very hard. So I helped my friend start a social media company with Lady Gaga. I was a founding chairman, and we made her a bunch of money on her little monsters. We like got all her users to create cool stuff. We had 1 million of her users on, and they create content and vote up content. The content they voted up, we like sold as what's called merch or merchandise at her concerts, and it tripled her merchandise sales by getting cool content from her users. So that was really cool. And we tried to like bring us to other artists, and it just completely failed. And there's like a comical series of failures like in a row, and the company was gone within a year or two. And it wasn't the main thing I was working on. It was fun to work with Lady Gaga, but at the same time, it was clear like my instincts in social media were actually not particularly good, and I hadn't done it before. And the people we'd hired were not particularly the best either. So I mean, yeah, so that was definitely a failure. The main time I had a really big failure is in 2008. I was kind of in charge of 4 or 5 different projects at once, including a couple of things at the fund, a couple of things at Palantir. And there was just so much going on that a lot of stuff didn't work out. And my rule, and there's politics that came and blew things up in ways I didn't expect. But my rule going forward is I should only be responsible for the failure of one thing at a time. So I'm trying to keep to that, but it's hard.
I'll have to remember that rule myself. I like that one.
I think it's useful, and it's good. Always better to make other people responsible and in charge.
For sure. Which of your biotech investments is maybe the most obscure, but maybe also has the biggest potential for impact?
Have you heard of Resilience Bio yet? We talked about this.
I have not. Tell us about it.
So at the beginning of the pandemic last year, I was chatting a bunch with my friend Bob Nelson, who's a legend in the bio world, and he's an early investor in Juno and Grail and all sorts of great. He was first investor in Illumina, if you heard of that one. Obviously, Sequencers. He's a great guy, and he was really worried. He understood COVID was a big deal in January, which I didn't. He was trying to convince us. And B, he was really worried about pharma production and making America more resilient. And he and I talked about this the next couple of months. I was watching the PPE situation. I'm like, wow, what if we can't get drugs either? And we said, well, what can we do to build more of this production in America, not just India and China and elsewhere, and in allied countries? And so we basically got a bunch of people together, started talking about it with all the heads of like big medical and pharma companies. And we raised a $49.9 million seed, which I learned is smart because that's for QSBS. You have to be under 50, and which I hadn't done before. And we hired some of the very top talent in the pharma world. Really, really great guys. They had giant bonuses they gave up to come with upside and with targets we gave them to win. And we ended up raising $750 million last year, early in the pandemic, as a second round for half the company to go buy a bunch of these manufacturing facilities, and then broaden talent to upgrade them to produce mRNA and to produce gene therapies and to produce a bunch of other kind of advanced things. Then we started taking in IP from tons of different places and groups we partner with, and now we're producing all sorts of mRNA, all sorts of new vaccines, all sorts of new gene therapies and whatnot in phase 1. And it's we're buying more plants, raising more money and much higher valuations. And so it's a very cool, just kind of like giving America. We actually have one in Britain as well, like more manufacturing capability for these new advanced things that are coming. I thought that was kind of a fun infrastructure play for the space.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Resilience Bio, right?
Yep.
That's amazing. So do you have any advice for people? We're mostly a software oriented meetup, although we're trying to appeal to a broader audience. Do you have any advice for people coming from computing to get into this renaissance in bio?
Find people who are doing cool things who need the help of computer scientists. A lot of them do. Don't join the first company right away necessarily, or do join and learn. But there's a lot of companies out there right now who are working on problems in biology that become information problems, and they're definitely worth learning about. Go and study cell therapy, study the infrastructure company, study cell therapy, study Synthigo, which is one of the companies that makes things, study what Hexagon's one of our companies that just are doing some really cool IT pipelines. If you're a talented computer scientist, I'm sure the guys there would talk to you about what they're doing. There's all sorts of really talented computer scientists working on these problems in bio, working on data problems. Microbiome is a great area if you're interested in that. There's a ton of cool things to do there that is driven by this. And just get involved, read a few books. It's one of those things where if you if you take your time, you can really become an expert in it. It's not that hard. I don't have a biology background. There's people on my team who are PhDs who know certain areas much better than me, but you're still able to do useful things because they do need people with our backgrounds in computer science.
Last two questions, and then we can sort of wrap it up here. Speaking of companies, that's how you research companies. How does one seek out mentors in life? You've had fantastic mentors. You've been a mentor to many other entrepreneurs out there. Give us some advice.
I think you have to work really hard yourself and show knowledge and talent and ability to help and contribute in some areas. And so I think if you make yourself somebody who is adding value in a way that people notice, then it's a lot easier to then like ask somebody who's talented in that field or is better known in that field to help you. You probably shouldn't go after the most famous mentors. Like, even though I was mentored by Peter Thiel, it wasn't when he's Peter Thiel right now. He wasn't really that known back then when I was working with him. So I think in general, like show value, work hard, create value, and then reach out to somebody who you think you admire, who you're smart. It's kind of like just making a bet, like just like you're making an investment bet in the Series A, you're making a bet on this person who's really smart and who you can help, and then they can help you, and you invest in trying to get to know them. And it's worth choosing a few people like that and doing your best. And some of them you won't be able to get to know, or some of them won't be as worthwhile, but some of them will be. So it's just I think of it as similar to how you think of a Series A portfolio, and then approach it strategically.
Yeah, I would agree with that. So final question, and how do we become more unified, less divided, and how do we create excitement about that?
That is a great question. One of the things I was noticing the other day, I was looking at a jacket I was pulling out of my closet, and I thought it said APC on the tag, and I looked at it more closely, and it was like ampersand and BC with some brand. And I just got me thinking about how, like, APC is my fun name, how like whatever we're thinking and wherever we're coming from, we're always imposing that in the world. And it's not just with our eyes, it's with our concepts. And so every time we see a concept, we all fit it into our view. If you like free markets, you fit into why free markets is better. If you think Republicans are stupid, you fit into why Republicans are definitely stupid every time you see it. So it's like whatever it is, there's just like, we all do that. And so I think the reality is that the truth exists in dialectics, and that there's always actually extreme truth there's always deep truth on different extremes. And so whatever you believe, I think it's like a very good exercise to try to take the exact opposite side and try to argue it to yourself and try to argue it to people close to you, and just like use it as an excuse to be more mentally flexible and dynamic. So rather than just like doing the same mental grooves and ruts over and over again, kind of gets you out of that rut. And it doesn't mean you have to argue something that's obviously stupid. It means you should find some kind of truth that you can admire in the other side, and something they're going for. And like, what is it they're going for? What is it, the truth that really matters to them, that actually something you can admire? And so this is like the wisdom, is that the dialectic, and to push ourselves to do that. How to get people excited about that wisdom, I don't know if humanity's built that way, Chris. So I'm open to suggestions.
Me too. Well, hey, Joe, thank you so much for joining us today. All of our attendees, please go to feedback.cloudcitymeetup.com right now. It's feedback.cloudcitymeetup.com. There's only 2 required questions, super simple. Click on it. We're open to any suggestions and feedback, of course. But thank you for joining us. And Joe, best of luck building. And thank you again for our time today. Our attendees, we will see you at the next one.
Hope to see you soon. Take care.
Absolutely. Bye-bye.